If you drive through the countryside of almost any nation on Earth, from the wheat belts of North America to the rice paddies of Asia, from the vineyards of France to the small holdings of Africa, you will see a familiar shape. It is a silhouette that has been etched into the landscape for nearly a century, a splash of red against the green and gold of the harvest, the triple triangle logo, Massey Ferguson. To the uninitiated, it is just a brand of machinery, but to those who know the soil, it is a lineage. It is a story that begins not in a boardroom, but in a blacksmith shop in the Canadian wilderness and a garage in Northern Ireland. It is a story of two brilliant, stubborn men, Daniel Massey and Harry Ferguson, who never met, but whose legacies collided to change the course of human history. Before them, farming was a battle of muscle against earth. After them, it became a science of power and precision. Over the next 20 minutes, we are going to tear down the engine of this history. We will look at the great merger, the invention that saved thousands of lives, the tractor that refused to die, and how a company survived corporate wars to remain a titan of the turf. This is the story of the Red Giant. This is the story of Massey Ferguson. Our story begins long before the internal combustion engine took over the farm. We have to go back to 1847. The place is Newcastle, Ontario, Canada. Daniel Massey was a man of his time, hardworking, religious, and intensely practical. He wasn't trying to build an empire, he was trying to solve a problem. In the mid-19th century, labor was scarce. If you wanted to expand your farm, you were limited by how many hands you could hire to scythe the wheat. Massey opened a small foundry, the Newcastle Foundry and Machine Manufactory. It wasn't glamorous. He made plows, harrows, and scufflers. But Daniel Massey had a gift. He wasn't just a manufacturer, he was a scout. He looked south to the United States, where the Industrial Revolution was speeding up, and he began importing and adapting American technology for Canadian soil. By the time Daniel passed the torch to his son, Hart Massey, the company was no longer a village workshop, it was a factory. But they weren't alone. Just down the road, another Canadian company was rising, A. Harris, Son & Co. For decades, Massey and Harris were bitter rivals. They fought the harvester wars. They sued each other. They tried to outprice each other. They sent agents to sabotage each other's sales demonstrations. But the 1990s brought a depression that threatened to bankrupt them both. In 1891, logic prevailed over ego. The two rivals shook hands and merged to form Massey Harris. This was the first pillar of the empire. By the early 20th century, Massey Harris was the largest agricultural manufacturer in the British Empire. They were famous for their harvesting equipment. In 1938, they produced the Massey Harris No. 20, the world's first commercially successful self-propelled combine harvester. Think about that for a second. Before the No. 20, combines were pulled by tractors or horses. Massey Harris put the engine inside the harvester. It was a revolution. They had the harvesting market cornered, but they had a weakness. Their tractors were heavy, clunky. They were essentially just engines on wheels dragging dead weight behind them. They needed a spark. They needed a genius. And thousands of miles away in Belfast, Ireland, a mechanic was about to change everything. Harry Ferguson was not a normal man. He was difficult, he was obsessive, and he was brilliant. He was the kind of man who would build his own airplane just to see if he could fly it, which he did, becoming the first Irishman to fly in Ireland. But Ferguson's obsession turned from the air to the ground during World War I. He watched Ireland's food production struggle. He saw how dangerous tractors were. In the 1920s, the standard tractor was a death trap. If a plow hit a buried rock or a thick tree root, the tractor wouldn't stop. The rear wheels would keep turning, the front of the tractor would lift off the ground, and the machine would flip backwards on top of the driver. It happened instantly. It killed hundreds of farmers every year. Ferguson realized the problem was the connection. The plow was just dragged behind the tractor by a chain or a drawbar. He had a vision. What if the tractor and the plow weren't two separate things? What if they were one single machine? This led to the three-point hitch and the Ferguson system. Here is how it worked and why it was genius. Instead of a tow bar, the plow connected to the tractor at 3 points, 2 bottom links and 1 top link. Using hydraulics, the tractor could lift the plow, but the real magic was something called draft control. If the plow hit a rock, the system felt the extra drag. The hydraulics would automatically lift the plow slightly, transferring the weight to the tractor's rear wheels. This gave the tires more grip and kept the front end of the tractor on the ground. It turned the tractor from a mechanical horse into a precision tool. Harry Ferguson knew he had the best design in the world, but he didn't have a factory, so he made a deal with the devil, or rather a deal with Henry Ford. The handshake agreement between Ferguson and Ford in 1938 led to the Ford-Ferguson 9N. It was a massive success, but the relationship soured. Ford's grandson eventually broke the agreement, leading to one of the longest and most expensive lawsuits in history. Ferguson won the lawsuit, but he was left without a manufacturing partner. He had the best tractor in the world, the TE20, the little gray Fergie, but he needed a global giant to build and sell his vision at scale. In 1953, the Canadian giant Massey Harris looked at the Irish genius Harry Ferguson, and the stars aligned. On August 12, 1953, the merger was official. Massey Harris Ferguson. A mouthful of a name, but a powerhouse of a company. It wasn't a smooth marriage. The cultures were different. The Massey engineers in Canada were conservative and practical. The Ferguson engineers in England were innovative and eccentric. There was infighting, there were resignations. Harry Ferguson himself left the company only a year later, frustrated by the corporate structure. But despite the boardroom drama, the factories were churning out gold. In 1958, they shortened the name, Massey Ferguson, and they made a decision that would define their visual identity forever. They dropped the gray of the Ferguson tractors and the yellow-red mix of the old Massey equipment. They adopted a uniform, striking red body with silver wheels. The triple triangle logo was finalized, representing the 3 distinct companies that had come together, Massey, Harris, and Ferguson. The result was the MF-35. It was the first tractor to really wear the new badge with pride. It was essentially a modernized Ferguson TE20, but with more power. It was a massive hit. But the company was about to strike oil. They were about to release a machine that would become the Volkswagen Beetle of agriculture. The year is 1964. The Beatles are on the radio, the space race is on, and Massey Ferguson launches the 100 series. The MF-135, the MF-165, the MF-175. If you know tractors, the hair on the back of your neck might stand up just hearing those numbers. Specifically, the MF-135. It is difficult to overstate how good this tractor was. It wasn't the biggest, it wasn't the fastest, but it was perfect. It featured the Perkins AD3152, a 3-cylinder diesel that seemed to run on fresh air and hope. It had the refined Ferguson hydraulic system. It was nimble enough for a small orchard, but strong enough for a heavy plow. Farmers fell in love. It was comfortable to drive. It was simple to fix. You could take it apart with a standard toolkit and put it back together in a barn. Massey Ferguson sold hundreds of thousands of them. Go to a farm in India today. Go to a coffee plantation in Brazil. Go to a small holding in Wales. You will see MF-135s that were built in 1968 still starting on the first turn of the key. They are widely considered the best tractor ever made, simply because they refused to become obsolete. This era, the 60s and 70s, was the golden age. Massey Ferguson became the world's largest manufacturer of tractors. They were exporting to nearly every country on the map. They were the undisputed kings of the global field. But as the 1980s approached, the storm clouds began to gather. The 1980s were a graveyard for agricultural companies. High interest rates, a global grain embargo, and a farming recession hit the industry like a sledgehammer. Farmers stopped buying new equipment. They fixed what they had. Massey Ferguson, despite its dominance, was overextended. They had too much debt, they had factories in too many places. The red giant began to bleed. The company went through a series of painful restructurings. They closed the historic Banner Lane factory in Coventry, England. It was a heartbreaking day for the workers and the city. The birthplace of the Grey Fergie was gone. For a while, it looked like Massey Ferguson might disappear, chopped up and sold for parts like so many of its competitors. But the brand was too strong. The loyalty of the farmers was too deep.
In 1994, the AGCO Corporation, an American agricultural giant, stepped in. They acquired Massey Ferguson. Many feared this would be the end of the identity, that AGCO would just slap the Massey sticker on generic machines. But AGCO was smart. They understood that Massey Ferguson wasn't just a name, it was a philosophy of engineering. They injected money, they modernized the factories, they kept the distinctive Beauvais factory in France running as the heart of European production. They brought the giant back to life. Today, Massey Ferguson is once again a leader in high horsepower technology. Look at the new 8S and 9S series. They look like spaceships compared to the old 135. They have Protect You cab designs, floating apart from the engine to reduce noise and vibration. They're fully connected, sending data to the cloud, allowing farmers to track yields down to the inch. But if you look closely, the DNA is still there. Strip away the digital screens, the air conditioning and the GPS. Underneath the red paint, you will still find the principles of Harry Ferguson. You will still find the desire to make the machine and the implement work as one. You will still find the practical durability of Daniel Massey. From the blacksmith's forge in Ontario to the high-tech assembly lines of Beauvais, the line remains unbroken. Massey Ferguson didn't just build tractors. They built the modern world's ability to feed itself. They turned the soil of 6 continents. So, the next time you see that red silhouette in a field, dragging a plow against the horizon, remember, you aren't just looking at a tractor. You are looking at a legacy.